Good morning, all of you. Welcome back to Ansarkari. So today, first we'll go through the Hindu newspaper for 26th of November, and then also we'll have a look at the important news from the Financial Express. So the first piece of news article is about the efficacy of the scheme MGNREGA, which guarantees 100 days of employment in a financial year to every unskilled worker in every rural household. So government has formed a panel to assess and analyze about the efficiency of the scheme, whether the scheme has been able to perform up to the mark for which it was intended, has it been able to achieve the objective of elevating poverty or not. And if you look at the data, certain poorer states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, they haven't been able to use the scheme optimally and obviously failed to elevate the poverty levels in the state. And when we look at certain economically better off states like Kerala, they use the scheme as an asset creation tool. So, given so much of expenditure the government is doing behind this scheme, why can't we ensure and monitor that is the amount being spent in the right manner? Are we really achieving the objectives or not? And if like the amount of workers who are participating in this scheme is 15 crores, so you can imagine the impact that the scheme can have when we focus on elevating the poverty, when we use it as an asset creation tool in the economy. So the scheme has been criticized, its working has been basically criticized by certain economists like Jagdish Bhaguti and Arvind Pangaria, and they say that it is an inefficient instrument of shifting income to the poor. However, obviously we are using it, providing income to the poor people, increasing their income so that they are able to satisfy their basic needs. But why is it inefficient now? Despite so many years of implementation, it still remains inefficient. So that is one of the major cause of concern behind the working of this scheme. And also there are other issues like the wages are not distributed or they're not dispersed on timely basis. So we can say there is corruption in the scheme, and we need to tackle the challenges that we are facing behind its effective implementation and ensure that we are able to economize over the scheme. Then coming to the next topic, that is the states are asking the center to have a control over their reliance on surcharges and cess while raising the revenue. So we're going to have a look at what are the federal fiscal issues between the center and the states. So center, their reliance over the revenue that is being generated from surcharge and cess has increased over a period of time. And when we look at the data, earlier the revenue that was being generated was 10.4% from surcharge and cess. In the period 2011-12, it was at 10.4%. But now in 2021-22, it stands at 26.7%. So this has grew, it has increased many folds. And now, firstly, the issue between regarding the fiscal devolution between the states and the center, it is firstly that the states they are demanding for an extension of the GST compensation period. So it is right now also, and it was when the GST was implemented in 2017, July 2017. It was said that states would be compensated for the next 5 years period, and that ends in 2022. So states they are demanding an extension of this period. And the second issue is that basically now states they are demanding that the surcharge and cess they should now be merged into the basic rates of taxes so that even these states can get a share out of them. And right now, currently, the surcharge and the cess they are not a part of the central divisible pool. So states do not get the revenue that the center is generating out of surcharges and cess. That remains with the center in its entirety. Then you can have a look at this beautiful view of the Dal Lake in Srinagar. And talking about the homosexuality, the homosexual couples, there is obviously now the Supreme Court, it is asking the government that should the marriages of the homosexual couple should be included under the Special Marriage Act of 1954 or not. So the act, it provides a civil form of marriage for the couples who cannot marry under their personal law, and non-recognition of the same-sex marriage, it amounts to discrimination that struck at the root of dignity and the self-fulfillment of the LGBTQ plus couples. So, as we know, in 2018, Supreme Court under the Navdeep Johar case, in which it held homosexuality as it was basically decriminalized under this judgment, and also the right to privacy was also held as a constitutional right in the Puttaswamy case. So there are about 15 legislations. So basically, after this judgment of decriminalization of homosexuality and the right to privacy, we do not see the legislative protection to the homosexual couples. So there are various laws which are guaranteeing the rights of wages, gratuity, adoption, surrogacy, etc., but which are not, they are not still available to the LGBTQ plus citizens. So the Supreme Court has asked what is the government view on this, and let's see what is going to be the government's reply. And when we see that fire incidents are taking place in markets like Chandni Chowk, where obviously this poses huge risk to human life, we see that despite knowing the fact that we need to take certain measures in the direction of ensuring fire safety, and even in case of any like natural disaster like earthquake, so there is so much of risk which lies there, and despite knowing this fact, we are not taking measures to ensure the safety. This amounts to failure of governance. Okay, then you must be aware about that Dr. Verghese Kurian is known as the milkman of India, and we are celebrating his 101st birth anniversary. And 26 November is also celebrated as the National Milk Day. A small fact which can come in PT. Then coming to the Kudankulam nuclear power plant, which is located in the state of Tamil Nadu, you must be aware about that. The nuclear power plant, this one has been set up in collaboration with the Russia, and the technology that it is using is the pressurized water reactor. So Russia has proposed providing a new advanced technology fuel which can help in running the reactor for 2 years consecutively without stopping, which is going to help us in ensuring more efficiency, more additional power generation, and thirdly, saving our foreign exchange reserve. And the Kudankulam plant is also the India's largest nuclear power stations. Coming to the editorials, it is talking about COP27 and the ambiguity about the responsibility. So it is basically talking about the outcome of the COP27. And however, we have discussed a lot on the COP27. So we'll just go through only the important details in brief. So the developed countries, they have the risk of, because they have obviously the risk from the climate change. So their energy needs are rising and they are vulnerable. At the same time, the population becomes vulnerable and at higher risk. So they need the financial support for low carbon transformation and building resilience to inevitable climate impacts. Now, we know that one of the major outcomes out of COP27 was the formation of the Loss and Damage Fund. So it focuses on rehabilitation, recovery, and reconstruction, but it is not focusing upon or it excludes the mention of the historic responsibility and the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So the keyword is common but differentiated responsibilities, and there is no clear indication that the fund will be paid for by the developed countries or not. So there's no clarification, there's no clarity on this, who is going to fund which countries, by what amount, what are going to be the basis of funding this loss and damage fund. So these things are, we can say, ambiguous as of now, and things are not clear and crisp. So the COP27, it focused on finance flows to support the positive climate action. So we need to take steps for positive climate action and looking at the climate finance. So in 2009, the developed countries, they had promised the developing countries $100 billion in climate finance annually by 2020, which still remains unmet, and the sources were also not clearly defined. But the developed countries, they now aim to meet this target by 2023. And talking about the other channels of finance, the first one is through the multilateral development banks. So they can play an important role, and they can play a supportive role for the climate action, and this will reduce basically what actions the multilateral development banks can undertake. Firstly, they can reduce the cost of borrowing for climate projects. Secondly, they can increase the finance for adaptation. And thirdly, to better align their operations with the Paris Agreement. So these can be the measures which the MDBs can take. And secondly, the second source of climate finance can be the carbon markets. So they would be basically channelizing the funds for the private sector. And how the carbon markets work is that some entities, they sell their carbon credits if they are able to successfully reduce their emissions below the target level, and they'll be selling that carbon certificate to the entities who are not able to meet their carbon emission target. So they buy that carbon certificate and in turn pay to the entity who has been able to successfully reduce their carbon emissions. So these are called carbon credits. And you must be aware what is the meaning of the term greenwashing. So you must be knowing about what is mind wash. So similarly is greenwashing. Basically, firms, they try to show that they are taking steps and measures to, you know, further reduce the impacts of climate change. They are taking steps to protect the environment, reducing their carbon emissions, and taking certain environment friendly steps. However, in reality, they are not. So they are trying to portray, we can say, they're trying to portray or display a false picture that they are taking steps, but in reality, they are not. So that is called greenwashing. Then we need to ensure sufficiency and predictability of finance when we are talking about climate finance. They must be sufficient. Secondly, they must be clearly defined. The mechanism must be clearly defined. The sources must be clearly defined. So 26th November, as we know, is celebrated as the Day of Constitution for India, as the Constitution of India was adopted on this day in the year 1949 by we the people of India. So talking about the celebrating this day, the article is talking about that the celebrations are just symbolic, whereas the actual celebration, we are basically, it is talking about what should be the components of the actual and the real celebration of this day. So that includes, firstly, people, the level of awareness in the people about the constitution, among that we the people. So when we seek an answer to this question, that what is the level of awareness of the people about the constitution, their constitutional rights, their fundamental rights, and the fundamental duties, the answer is obviously not going to be satisfactory and encouraging, because people, they are not even interested in knowing this. Say they are just running behind earning money. They just want to be get richer and richer in less period of time. So the ultimate focus is that, and they're not so much concerned, or they're least interested in knowing about their constitutional, the fundamental rights, and also their duties. So we need to ensure that people they firstly start generating interest in this, and they are aware citizens. So next up, we can say that when we are talking about equality, the constitution says that all the citizens, they are equal irrespective of their caste, creed, color, gender, estate, and education. And in reality, we are seeing that people are busy in discriminating, creating discrimination on the basis of religion, rituals, ignorance, and poverty, so which obviously gives rise to unacceptable inequalities between men and women, between rich and poor, between literate and illiterate, and the learned and the laity. So things are not, we can say, in sync when we compare them with the constitution and what is happening in reality on the ground. Then we pay great respect to the religious books and we treat them as sacred doctrines. But what about the Constitution? Even Constitution is a religious book, even it is equally as good as a sacred doctrine. But we fail to recognize that. And also now if we see that at some level people are broadly aware about the fundamental rights, but now we need to focus upon making them aware about their fundamental duties also, because with rights comes responsibilities. So we are largely unaware about the fundamental duties enshrined in the constitution, which are mentioned in part 4a. So, and talking about parenting, the parents, they want their children to grow up as a responsible adult with mature minds and restrained manners, but what steps are they actually taking to ensure that they grow in such a manner? So instead of gifting them a constitution on their birthday, now even saying this, some people would start laughing at this. But they don't take up these things so seriously and they are just running behind consumerism and materialism. So, Article 15, as it says, that the state shall not discriminate against any citizens on the grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. So, firstly, for us, as being a UPSC aspirant, we all must be aware about our fundamental rights, fundamental duties in a crisp and clear manner. So we are hardly focusing on the constitution even at the school level. So due recognition across the educational system must be given even to the constitution. So we must have separate classes, or accordingly, we can see that how the constitution can be included, can be made a part of our education system. So if all these things are met and they are, we can see that these things are happening in reality on ground, then we can say that we are celebrating our constitution, the achievement that we made after independence, and instead of just having symbolic representations and celebrations on 26th of November. So constitution must be a part of our everyday life and not just celebrating it on one day, that is today. So talking about the Sri Lankan economy, we know that it is going through an economic crisis. So the farmers practicing tea cultivation are also facing the brunt of it, and they face structural deprivation, there's soaring inflation and joblessness every day. So their everyday life now becomes a struggle. And for us, as far as PT is concerned, we must be aware about all the details which are important from the perspective of the National Human Rights Commission. And so, an incident has happened on the border of the state of Assam and Meghalaya, which led to killing of 6 people, and the firing happened by the forces, by the personnel, police personnel. So, does this raises questions about increasing the sensitization of the forces posted in sensitive areas? So, can RBI help the people who genuinely failed to exchange their notes when demonetization happened? So, is there any mechanism to actualize on this thing and to ensure that the people who were not able to exchange the notes, due to genuine reasons, can do so now. So let's see if any solution to this thing arises. Now, talking about the data protection bill. So, this article is talking about the views of Sir B.N. Sri Krishna, who had earlier proposed the first draft of the Personal Data Protection Bill in 2018. So his views are included in this article. So he says the bill is loaded in favor of the government, and this is majorly talking about the negative aspects of the data protection bill. So, talking about the positive, he just says that the simplicity of language and reduction in size is one of the good points about it, but obviously we cannot, you know, forsake the clarity of the legislation for simplicity. So he says that another good thing is the consent managers, then the data board is a creation of the executive, but there are no guidelines on its composition, its establishment, and qualifications. And as I said, that the bill is loaded in favor of the government. So this gives arbitrary powers to the government, which is obviously not acceptable. And there are legislative guidelines within which the executive may frame the subordinate legislation. So this thing is lacking in the bill, and there must be legislative guidelines on the basis of which the government should form the subordinate guidelines or the subordinate legislations to ensure the implementation of those guidelines. But the bill lacks this part, and obviously, then the nature becomes more arbitrary, and permitting the executive to act arbitrarily will become unconstitutional and void. So, according to him, what is the need? Like, what more changes are required in the bill? So, a robust and independent regulator is the need of the hour, and we need a data protection authority to ensure the regulation. And even the regulator must be an independent body without any government interference or any arbitrary power given to the government. And does the draft express any concern on the protection of the fundamental right of data privacy? So, in this case, there is power to exempt all the government institutions from any or all the provisions of the law. So, like, there is such a huge power given to the government. Basically, it seems that these things are in favor of the government. Only government has power in each and everything. So government institutions, they can be completely barred from the, we can say this in a manner that the government can ensure that this bill is not applicable on the government institutions. So it is making them safe and giving more power to the government. And there is over reliance on the rules to be framed by the government. So ultimately, it is just showing that government has a lot of power in this draft data protection bill without any legislative guidance in the law. And out 18 of the 30 clauses, they leave the issue to the government. So government is going to decide the ultimate thing. And talking about the triple test, which was laid down by the Puttaswamy judgment, even that has been totally abandoned under this draft, and the bill is fundamentally flawed. So the fundamentals are itself flawed. So what else can we talk about? So this is just one perspective about the draft, and you can take the points as the criticization of the bill. Then in economy, so economy first we'll take up the global news. So nothing much important. So in economy, the IRDI, that is the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, it has now allowed the PE funds to invest directly in the insurers. So as a measure of reform, it has come up with certain proposals, which includes permitting the private equity funds to directly invest in the insurers in a bid to promote more ease of doing business in the insurance sector. So certain reforms have been taken up. You can go through this article, and the statements they can come in PT. Now, center, it is likely to rationalize the long-term capital gains tax structure. So things are being happening to, reform the capital gains tax structure so that, again, to increase the ease of doing business and more clarity, reduce the cost of compliance. So the shares which are held for more than 1 year, they attract a 10% tax as the long-term capital gains tax. So the ones which are held for more than 1 year, they are attracting 10% of the tax, and the gains that are arising from the sale of any immovable property and unlisted shares held for more than 2 years, and the debt instruments and the jewelry held for more than 3 years, they are going to attract a tax of 20%. So this can definitely come in PT also. So you must be aware about the tax, the amount of tax, and the time period, and the things which are a part of it. Now, SEBI, it includes buying, selling of mutual funds under the insider trading rule. So you must have clarity about what is insider trading. So insider trading is basically people who are working as employees. They have certain confidential information and they use that information for their own benefits because that information is confidential and other people are not aware about it. But the employees or the employer, they are using it for their own benefit. So that is insider trading to earn obviously huge profits in the capital market. So SEBI has come up with one reform as far as mutual funds is concerned. So now they are basically covering even the mutual funds under this insider trading rules. So no insider person, he shall trade in the units of a scheme of a mutual funds also, and when in possession of the unpublished price sensitive information. So the information that is price sensitive, if it is known to other people, it can definitely lead to changes in the price. So that is, the price sensitive information is available with certain people of the company, of the organization or the institution, which may have a material impact on the net asset value of a scheme. So this reform has come up after the Franklin Templeton incidents that happened. So yes, we are like, things are not lagging so much. If any scam is happening or things like are coming to the forefront, we are taking steps and measures to prevent them from happening in the future. And talking about India and UAE, their central banks, they are in a discussion over the rupee and dirham trade. So we are, in a way, reducing our dependence upon the usage of dollar as far as trade is concerned, which is going to be obviously less costly and save our forex reserves. And also in this context, we have had a detailed discussion over the rupee watchdog accounts being set up between India and Russia also. So that is also a step in this direction, reducing our dependence upon the usage of dollar, because then obviously things becomes more vulnerable. And a concept paper which is promoting the bilateral trade in rupee and dirham with a view to reducing the transaction cost. So this is it from the Hindu. Now let's take up the Financial Express. So looking at the Financial Express, you can see from the data protection bill only, we'll be seeing that a new perspective, a new side of it is talking about the once the bill becomes a law, the citizens, the people, they can ask the platforms to delete all their past user data and collect the data afresh. And also the platforms, they'll now have to tell the users about the purpose for which they are collecting their data, and if there is any data breach, so they depart from, so the incidents, basically if they are departing from the purpose for which the data was collected, so that incident would be called as data breach, and accordingly they'll be penalized for that. So this is basically, now it is showing that the bill is also talking about protecting the interest of the citizens also regarding their data protection rights. So Q2 GDP growth seen around 6.5%. Like we have been growing at a steady rate, we can say, when we compare our growth level with the other countries, given the challenges that we are facing and obviously the huge impacts because of COVID-19 that we have had, and we are still seeing we have not completely recovered out of that. So we see that the growth in quarter two was because of the strong pent up demand. So you must be aware about what is a pent up demand. Basically, the demand which was not able to meet because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which remained unfulfilled. So now people are trying to fulfill that demand now because things are becoming normal. So that demand is increasing, and it is not, we can say, fresh demand or demand for new goods and services because of the economic situation now. So it is the unfulfilled demand that is called the pent up demand. So that is the reason behind the growth that we are seeing in the current period. Okay, talking about, firstly, we'll see that what Greta Thunberg has to say about the climate change. So she says that we don't have laws that provide long-term protection from the consequences of climate and environmental crisis. So we do not have laws, long-term laws, and we need to use the methods that are at our disposal right now and do everything we can do. So we can say a youth activist. She is trying to make more and more people aware about the climate crisis that we are facing, and also ensuring and pushing things that we take steps to prevent this crisis from further deepening. Talking about the India's export sector. So this article is providing a lot of valuable information to us. So please be attentive when we are discussing this. So export sector has been one of the key driver of India's growth in recent years. Now, given the prediction about global slowdown, we need to ensure that the growth, because that we were generating from the exports growth, we need to ensure that that is not impacted massively, because otherwise obviously then that is going to impact our overall growth. So we see that our merchandise exports have contracted in the month of October, and we see that they constitute a big chunk of the economy. Basically, they here means the export sector. So when we look at the data of quarter one of the current financial year, we see that the trade sector accounted for 23% of the GDP in real terms. So the contribution is huge, and we need to ensure, we need to protect the people who are working in this sector. So we see that because of weak global demand, it can that how the weak global demand is can be seen in the fact that the core and the non-oil exports, they have been contracting over the last 4 months. So it is showing that the global demand is weakening because the exports in the non-oil and the core sector, they are declining. So volumes of the items such as in textiles, gems and jewelry, and the agricultural products, even they are shrinking. But when we look at the high technology goods, which includes electronics, engineering goods, and the pharmaceutical products, they continue to perform well. So we need to focus more upon the textiles, gems and jewelry, and agricultural products as far as trade is concerned, our exports are concerned. And we see that now the Indian rupee has depreciated by about 9% since January this year. So depreciation of the rupee helps in making our exports more competitive, but at the same time, it increases the cost of our imports as well. But when we see that rupee depreciation has it, you know, been a factor behind increasing the exports or not, we see that there is not much influence of rupee depreciation on increasing our exports. Rather, which means that if exports, they are not seeing a good performance because of depreciating rupee, so imports will obviously, they will turn expensive. So uh, this has led to bad performance of our BOP accounts. So we have seen huge increase in our trade deficit. So when we looked at comparing the depreciation of our domestic currency with that of the other currencies, we see that rupee has not fallen by much amount. We see that Philippines peso was down by 10%. China's Remini has lost 11.6%. So we have not performed that badly when we compare it with other economies. So far, weaker rupee it seems to have fetched Indians exporters only limited gains, as I said, and the export sector it employs large number of people, so the government should be prepared to support the sector in future if the need be, and higher exports would definitely help in narrowing the trade gap, which is right now at $175 billion. So this is the trade deficit that we have right now, and we expect that it would come out to be 3.3% of the GDP, which can be managed. Now, right now, our focus should be on when the oil import bills it remains elevated because obviously of the Russia-Ukraine war, and obviously things has not turned normal because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We need to focus on our exports to ensure that we do not see a dull growth in future in our exports. So MPC, that is the Monetary Policy Committee, the panel blames the global factors behind inflation in letter to the government. So majorly two factors. Firstly, the Russia-Ukraine war, which has led to increase in the energy prices and the food cost. Second is the supply disruptions because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are the major global two factors listed by the MPC in the letter to the government, and stating that the worst of inflationary pressure that has been probably we have witnessed that and surpassed the worst of the inflationary pressures that could have happened. Now, earlier also the RBI had submitted a letter to the government stating the reasons why the inflation, why basically why it failed to meet the inflation targets. Now, in that letter, it is mandatory for it to state the reasons behind the failure and also what steps is it going to take in future to ensure that the target is not breached. So that is the highlighted portion which is speaking about this thing. There is one more important thing which is left. So, what is the expenses of management? So, the insurance regulator, it has come up with the revised draft norms on the expenses of management for the non-life insurance companies. So, what is the expenses of management? Basically, it includes an insurance company's operating expenses, the commission to the insurance agents, and thirdly, the intermediaries also, and fourthly, the commission and the expenses on the reinsurance inward. So these are all accounted as the revenue account in the revenue account and are a part of the expenses of management of the non-life insurance companies. And apart from the premium that is earned and the claims that are incurred, the expenses on management, it is a tool to calculate an insurer's profitability. So the insurance regulator it has proposed certain caps on so as to bring about efficiency in the business while holding the interest of the policy upholding the interest of the policyholders also. So it is suggesting that there must be a cap of 30% as far as the general insurance is concerned and 35% for the standalone health insurers. And right now, the expenses of management for the non-life insurance currently stands at 20 to 37.5%. So this was regarding this thing. And when we look at the performance of the economy of Bangladesh, we see that it is on a track to be $1 trillion economy by 2040. So when we compare the performance of our the neighboring economies, the Bangladesh is the one which is performing the best. It is performing at the highest level. So you can see that the average annual GDP growth percentage per annum from 2016 to 2021 for Bangladesh stands at 6.5, for Vietnam 5.4. So Bangladesh is the best performing. And also this graph is showing the Bangladesh. It is set to become the ninth largest consumer market globally by 2030, ninth largest consumer market. So India being a neighbor of Bangladesh, how India can leverage this opportunity, the opportunity is to be seen. In which areas can we work to benefit out of the good performance of the economy of Bangladesh? So on this note, It's a wrap for today, and thank you for joining Ansalkari. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share the video as much as possible. Thank you so much for joining.